There are moments that act as a hinge for your life, separating the time that came before from the time that comes after. They are rarely loud or dramatic. They do not arrive with a flash of lightning or a roll of thunder. Instead, they come disguised as something ordinary, a question, a shared silence, a car ride home that takes an unexpected turn. My hinge moment arrived on a Tuesday night in late autumn, smelling of rain-slicked asphalt and the faint, clean scent of the laundry detergent Julian used. It was the moment he was supposed to turn right onto my street, and instead, he just kept driving. He didn't say anything at first. The car, his ridiculously sensible sedan that always seemed at odds with the boundless, kinetic energy he carried within him, moved smoothly through the sleeping suburban streets. Streetlights slid across the windshield in hypnotic, amber waves, illuminating his profile for a brief second before plunging him back into shadow. I watched the hard line of his jaw, the slight tension in his shoulders that I had learned to recognize as a symptom of a mind working overtime. My own street sign, a familiar green rectangle with white lettering, had drifted past the passenger window like a ghost. My heart, which had been beating at a calm, companionable rhythm, gave a sudden, painful lurch, as if it had been kicked. The silence in the car wasn't empty. It was dense, packed with everything we hadn't said for the better part of a year. It was a physical presence, a third passenger sitting between us. I could feel its weight pressing on my chest, making it difficult to draw a full breath. I didn't speak. I have always been a creature of observation, a documentarian of quiet things. As a photographer, my entire life was built around the practice of waiting, of watching the light change, of anticipating the precise, fleeting instant a person's guard would drop and reveal something true. And so I waited now, my hands resting loosely in my lap, my gaze fixed on the road ahead. My own house, with its warm lights and the familiar solitude I both cherished and cursed, was now behind us, receding into the darkness. We were adrift. He had cut the rope that tethered us to the predictable shore of our friendship, and we were now floating out into an unknown, unlit ocean. Every possibility felt both terrifying and euphoric. Maybe he was just lost in thought. Maybe he was tired and had made a simple mistake. My mind, a frantic lawyer, presented these plausible, rational explanations. But my heart, a foolish, hopeful poet, dismissed them all. It knew. It had been waiting for a sign, and it was desperately afraid that this was it. Finally, after we'd traveled another 3 blocks in that charged silence, his voice, when it came, was lower than usual, roughened with an emotion I couldn't quite name. I'm not ready to say goodnight. The words were not a proposition. They were a confession. They landed in the quiet space of the car not as a stone, but as a feather, almost weightless yet altering the very gravity of the moment. I felt them settle deep inside my bones. I'm not ready to say goodnight. It was such a simple, human sentiment, yet coming from Julian, it was a seismic event. Julian, who lived his life at a sprint, who juggled a demanding consulting job with a travel schedule that would exhaust a migratory bird, who filled every silence with a joke or a plan or a story. For him to admit to a need for stillness, for him to actively prolong a quiet moment with me, was to turn his entire world on its axis. And in doing so, he was turning mine, too. I finally turned to look at him, really look at him, and in the fleeting glow of another streetlight, I saw it. Not just exhaustion, but a profound and aching loneliness in his eyes. It was a look I knew intimately, because I saw it in my own reflection every single day. And in that shared, silent recognition, the hinge of my life began to swing open onto a new and terrifyingly beautiful room. To understand the weight of that car ride, to grasp the tectonic shift contained within those 6 simple words, you have to understand the architecture of the world we had built before it. You have to see the foundation of our friendship, laid so carefully, brick by brick, with unspoken rules and carefully maintained boundaries. It was a structure designed to be safe, to be permanent, precisely because one of us knew it was made of glass. And that one, of course, was me. I met Julian through our local recreational soccer league. a collection of has-beens and never-weres who clung to the memory of athletic glory. I was the goalkeeper, a position that suited my temperament perfectly. It is a role of profound isolation and intense observation. For long stretches, you are a spectator, watching the patterns of the game unfold from a distance, analyzing the flow, the currents of energy. Then, for a few frantic seconds, you are the absolute center of everything, the single point upon which victory or defeat rests. You must be patient, and then you must be decisive. Julian was the opposite. He was a midfielder, all perpetual motion and restless energy, a blur of controlled chaos at the center of the pitch. He joined the team mid-season, a transplant from another city for his consulting work, and he slotted into the social fabric of the team as easily as he slotted a pass between two defenders. He was effortlessly charming, with a laugh that was loud and genuine and made people feel seen. Our friendship didn't ignite on the field. It began, as many male friendships do, in the liminal space of post-game commiseration at a dingy pub that served cheap beer and questionable wings. While the others rehashed plays and debated referee calls, Julian asked me about my camera, which I often had with me. He didn't just ask what I photographed, he asked why. He wanted to know what I saw, what I was looking for when I pressed the shutter. No one had ever asked me that before. People saw photography as a technical skill, a hobby. Julian saw it as a language. He listened, truly listened, as I tried to explain the feeling of capturing a moment of unscripted grace, of finding order in the visual noise of the world. He was the first person to make me feel like my quiet way of seeing things wasn't a deficit, but a point of view. From there, the friendship deepened with an easy, natural cadence, like a photograph developing in a tray. We discovered a shared love for old films, for long, aimless walks through the city's forgotten neighborhoods, for the specific kind of silence that can only be shared between two people who are truly comfortable with one another. I learned the topography of his life, the demanding job that kept him on planes more than on solid ground, the complicated history with his family in another state, the on-again, off-again relationship with a girlfriend named Clara, a woman who existed to me only as a name on a screen, a source of periodic turbulence in Julian's otherwise sunny atmosphere. I can pinpoint the exact moment my feelings for him shifted, the moment the solid ground of platonic affection gave way to something far more treacherous and deep. It was a rainy Saturday afternoon. We were in my apartment, a small, quiet space that I had curated as a refuge from the world, filled with books and prints of my work. We were watching some black and white noir film, and Julian, who had been fighting off a cold, had fallen asleep on the couch. His head had slumped sideways, coming to rest on my shoulder. It was an innocent, unconscious act, the kind of casual physicality that meant nothing. But for me, it meant everything. The weight of his head on my shoulder was revelatory. It was a solid, grounding presence. I could feel the warmth of him through the fabric of my shirt, hear the soft, even rhythm of his breathing. The rain beat a gentle tattoo against the window pane, and the only other sound was the tinny dialogue from the television. I sat there, completely still, for what must have been over an hour, my arm going numb, my heart hammering a frantic, silent rhythm against my ribs. I studied the way his dark hair fell across his forehead, the relaxed line of his mouth, the faint stubble on his jaw. And in that quiet, rain-soaked afternoon, a door opened inside me. A door I hadn't even known was there. And on the other side of it was not friendship, but a vast, terrifying, and achingly beautiful landscape of longing. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I was in love with him. And with that realization came an immediate and visceral fear. Our friendship had become a vital structure in my life, a load-bearing wall in the often lonely architecture of my existence. To confess my feelings would be to take a sledgehammer to that wall. Julian was straight, as far as I knew. He had Clara. He saw me as a brother, a confidant, a safe harbor. To introduce this new, complicated variable would be to risk everything. It would taint the easy silences, poison the casual intimacy. I would become a problem to be solved, a situation to be managed. The thought was unbearable. So I made a choice. I would be the keeper of this secret. I would build a room inside myself to house this feeling, and I would lock the door. I would reinforce the walls of our friendship from my side, making them so thick and so solid that nothing could ever threaten them. I would become a master of emotional self-protection, a guardian of the status quo. My camera had taught me how to frame a scene, how to crop out the unwanted elements to create a pleasing composition. I would do the same with my own heart. I would frame our friendship perfectly, and I would crop my love for him completely out of the picture. The catalyst for change, when it finally came, was not something I did. It was something that happened to Julian. His relationship with Clara didn't just end, it shattered. It was a messy, drawn-out demolition that left him gutted. I only ever got the broad strokes, filtered through his exhaustion and reluctance to cast blame. There were accusations, misunderstandings, the slow, painful realization that they were two people trying to build a future on a foundation of incompatible dreams. When it was finally, officially over, a strange quiet fell over Julian's life. The constant hum of his phone, the low-level anxiety that had surrounded his interactions with her, was gone. But its absence didn't bring peace. It left a vacuum. It was then that he started showing up at my apartment. At first, it was under the guise of needing a distraction. "Can't stand my own place right now," he'd say, shrugging off his jacket and collapsing onto my couch as if his strings had been cut. "It's too quiet." He didn't want to talk about Clara, not really. He would mention her in passing, a brief, bitter flicker of memory, but he wouldn't dwell. What he wanted, I began to realize, was not therapy or advice. He wanted presence. He wanted to be in a space that felt safe, a space that held no memories of her, a space that was, for him, blessedly uncomplicated. My quiet, ordered apartment became his sanctuary. The dynamic of our friendship began to shift, slowly, almost imperceptibly at first. The boundary between my life and his began to dissolve. He started leaving things at my place. A toothbrush, a change of clothes for the gym, a specific coffee mug he preferred. These were small, seemingly insignificant encroachments, but they felt like geological shifts to me. He was no longer just a visitor in my space. He was becoming part of its landscape. He would come over after a grueling week of travel, not with a plan to go out, but with a takeout bag and a look of profound weariness. He just wanted to be still. He was a ship battered by a relentless storm, and my little apartment was the one quiet port he could find. I watched this transformation with a heart that was a tangled mess of joy and terror. The part of me that loved him was thrilled to have him near, to be the person he sought out for comfort. But the part of me that was the guardian of our friendship, the keeper of the locked room, was sounding every alarm. The lines were blurring. The carefully constructed walls were becoming porous. He was seeking a level of intimacy and comfort that our platonic blueprint wasn't designed to support, and I was terrified that the entire structure would collapse under the new and unacknowledged weight. This new, fragile dynamic soon found its rhythm, coalescing into a ritual. It was a ritual of unspoken need and ambiguous comfort, and it revolved around my living room couch. It began with movie nights. We'd always done this, but now they became more frequent, more necessary. They were the framework he used to ask for proximity without having to use the words. In the beginning, he would maintain a careful distance, a cushion's width of empty space between us, a physical representation of the platonic boundary we both tacitly observed. I was hyper-aware of that space. It was a no-man's land, charged with unspoken energy. I could feel the warmth radiating from him across that small gap, could smell the faint, clean scent of his skin. I would focus on the film with a ferocious intensity, using the screen as a shield, my mind narrating the plot to drown out the much more compelling drama unfolding silently beside me. Then, one night, after a particularly brutal work trip had left him hollow-eyed and frayed at the edges, the boundary was breached. He was fighting sleep, his head nodding forward before he'd jerk it back up. "Sorry," he mumbled, his voice thick. Jet lag is a monster, then. With a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of his entire week, he let his head fall sideways, coming to rest on my shoulder. It was the echo of that first, accidental moment months ago, But this time it felt different. It felt intentional. My entire body went rigid. Every nerve ending fired at once. It was a deluge of sensory information. The surprising weight of his skull, the soft tickle of his hair against my neck, the steady, rhythmic puff of his breath against my collarbone. I sat there, a statue carved from anxiety, my own breathing shallow and carefully controlled, terrified that any movement would break the spell. He didn't move. He just sank into the contact, a silent surrender. After a few agonizingly long minutes, I forced my own muscles to relax. I willed my heart to slow its frantic pace. This is what friends do, I told myself, a desperate, repeating mantra. He's exhausted. He needs comfort. This is not about you. This is not about your secret, locked room. This is about being a good friend to someone who is hurting and tired. I was trying to frame the moment, to put it into a box labeled platonic comfort, but the label wouldn't stick. The box was too small. The feeling was too large. My longing was a rising tide, and I was terrified it would breach the seawall I had so painstakingly constructed. That night became the new template. The ritual evolved. The pretense of falling asleep wore thin, and then disappeared altogether. He would simply sit down next to me, and after a few minutes of quiet, he would lean against me, his head finding its now familiar place on my shoulder. Sometimes, his arm would drape across my stomach, his hand resting loosely on my side. Each new point of contact was a fresh shock to my system, a new piece of data for my overactive mind to analyze. What did this mean? Did he do this with other friends? Did he have any idea what this casual, constant touch was doing to me? It was a sweet and exquisite torture. It was everything I had ever wanted, offered under a flag of plausible deniability that made it impossible to truly accept. I was a man dying of thirst, being given just enough water to survive, but never enough to quench the ache. The ritual expanded beyond the couch. He started staying the night more often, especially after late games or long workdays. He always took the couch, of course. My bedroom was my own private territory, the inner sanctum. But a new element introduced itself into our nightly routine, the open door. I had always been someone who slept with my bedroom door closed. It was a habit, a need for a clear boundary between my sleeping space and the rest of the world. But after he started staying over, I began to leave it ajar. I told myself it was so I could hear if he needed anything, a flimsy, transparent excuse even to my own ears. The truth was, the open door was a metaphor. It was a question hanging in the silent, darkened apartment. It was a physical manifestation of my own wavering resolve. I would lie in my bed, staring at that thin slice of hallway light, and I would listen. I'd listen to the sounds of him shifting on the couch, the soft sigh as he settled into sleep. The space between my closed eyes and that open door felt like 1,000 miles of fraught territory. Was he aware of it? Did he notice the change? Or was it just another detail he overlooked in his exhaustion? The open door became a symbol of our entire relationship, a gesture of invitation shrouded in ambiguity, a question I was too afraid to ask, and he was perhaps too blind to see. Each night was a battle within myself. Close it, the voice of self-preservation would scream. Protect yourself. Don't offer an invitation you can't bear to have rejected. But the voice of hope, that foolish, persistent poet in my heart, would whisper, leave it, just in case. He was creating a new normal through his need for physical comfort, and I was allowing it, even enabling it, through my silence. We were like two celestial bodies, slowly being drawn into each other's orbit by a gravitational pull neither of us was willing to name. The tension was becoming unbearable. The silence was getting louder. The ritual was no longer enough. Something had to break. And that brings us back to the car. Back to the rain-slicked streets and the hypnotic pulse of the streetlights. Back to the moment my world tilted on its axis. When he drove past my street, it was as if he had finally, decisively, pushed the open door all the way open. He was no longer waiting on the threshold. He was stepping inside. His confession, "I'm not ready to say goodnight," hung in the air between us, a tangible thing. It was the answer to 1,000 unspoken questions I had tortured myself with in the dead of night. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't just my imagination. I finally found my voice, though it felt like an unfamiliar instrument. "Where are we going, Julian?" He glanced at me, and for the first time that night, a faint, nervous smile touched his lips. It wasn't his usual bright, confident grin. This was something new, something fragile. "I don't know," he admitted, his eyes returning to the road. "Just not back there. Not yet." He drove us out of the labyrinth of residential streets, toward the hills that overlooked the city. It was a familiar drive. We'd come up here before on clear summer nights to watch the city lights twinkle below like a fallen constellation. But tonight, it felt different. The city was shrouded in a low-hanging mist, the lights blurred and softened, as if we were looking at them through a frosted window. He pulled the car over at a scenic viewpoint, the same one we always used, and cut the engine. The sudden silence was immense, broken only by the faint whisper of the wind and the rhythmic sweep of the windshield wipers clearing away the light drizzle. We sat there for a long time, not speaking. The space between us was no longer a void of anxiety, but a vessel filled with anticipation. The question had been asked, in a way. He had made his move. The next step, I knew, was mine. But I was still the quiet observer, the man who waited for the perfect moment. I was terrified of misreading the light. What if I moved too soon? What if I was still wrong? He was the one who had initiated this. He had to be the one to see it through. He had to be the one to say the words, to give a name to this current that was pulling us out to sea. He finally broke the silence, his voice barely a whisper. He didn't look at me. He stared straight ahead, at the blurred tapestry of the city below. "Leo," he said my name like it was a difficult word to pronounce. Can I ask you something really stupid?" My heart felt like it was going to beat its way out of my chest. I turned my body slightly toward him. "You can ask me anything." He took a deep, shuddering breath, the kind you take before diving into cold water. He finally turned his head, and his eyes found mine in the dim, shadowy light of the car. The confidence he usually wore like a well-tailored suit was gone. In its place was a raw, terrifying vulnerability that mirrored my own. I could see the frantic debate in his eyes, the fear warring with the need. "This whole time," he started, his voice cracking slightly. "These past few months. Me, on your couch. Has that been okay?" Of all the things I expected him to say, that wasn't it. The simplicity and the sincerity of the question disarmed me completely. He wasn't asking about love, or desire, or any of the big, scary words. He was asking about comfort. He was asking for consent, retroactively. He was asking if his own desperate need for a safe harbor had been a burden to me. The locked room inside me, the one I had guarded so fiercely for so long, finally gave way. The door didn't just swing open, it dissolved into dust. "Julian," I said, my own voice thick with emotion. "It's always been okay." A wave of relief washed over his face, so palpable I could almost feel it myself. It was as if I had just lifted a tremendous weight from his shoulders. He held my gaze for another long moment, his eyes searching mine for something. For permission, I realized. For the final confirmation that this path was safe to walk. He leaned in slowly, tentatively, giving me every opportunity to pull away, to stop him, to put the walls back up. His movement was a question, silent and profound. I didn't pull away. I met him halfway. The first kiss wasn't passionate or demanding. It was a discovery. It was soft and hesitant, a gentle press of lips, a quiet exploration. It tasted of rain and salt, and a year's worth of unspoken things. It was a confession and an absolution all at once. It was the sound of a key turning in a lock. In that single, breathtaking moment, the entire architecture of our relationship was razed to the ground, and something new, something honest and terrifying and beautiful, began to be built in its place. He pulled back just an inch, his forehead resting against mine, his eyes still closed. I could feel his breath, warm and unsteady, on my lips. The silence that followed wasn't empty or charged. It was peaceful. It was the quiet after a storm. It was the feeling of finally, after a long and perilous journey, arriving home. The world, in the immediate aftermath of that moment, did not feel real. It felt like a photograph that was still developing, the image slowly emerging from a chemical haze, its final form uncertain. The drive back to my apartment was a dreamlike sequence, a silent film playing out in the dark. We didn't speak. There were no words for what had just happened, no vocabulary that could contain the sheer magnitude of the shift. When he parked in my designated spot, he killed the engine, and we just sat there again, suspended in the quiet hum of the cooling engine. The air was thick with the ghost of that kiss. I could still feel the phantom pressure of his lips on mine, a delicate brand that had rewritten my entire history. But as the minutes ticked by, a new feeling began to seep into the peaceful atmosphere, a cold, creeping dread. It was the anxiety of the morning after, arriving 12 hours too soon. The silence, which moments before had felt like a comfortable blanket, now began to feel like a void. I looked over at Julian. He was staring at his hands, which were clenched tightly around the steering wheel. The vulnerable openness I had seen in his eyes at the lookout point was gone, replaced by a shuttered, troubled expression. A storm was gathering behind his eyes. He had initiated the crossing, but it was clear he had no idea what to do now that he was on the other side. He looked like a man who had just woken up from a dream and was struggling to reconcile it with the stark reality of his surroundings. I was the one who finally broke the silence. "Do you want to come up?" The words felt clumsy, inadequate. He flinched, almost imperceptibly, but I saw it. He shook his head, still not looking at me. I think I should probably go home," he said, his voice strained and distant. "It's late." Home. His own apartment. The place he had been actively avoiding for months. The word was a punch to the gut. It was a retreat, a retraction. Every alarm bell in my body, which had been silenced by the kiss, began to ring with a deafening clamor. He was pulling away. He was closing the door he had just kicked open. I felt a cold wave of panic wash over me. I had misinterpreted everything. It wasn't a confession. It was a moment of weakness, a fleeting impulse born of loneliness and confusion, and now, in the sober light of the parking lot, he was regretting it. I had let my hope, that foolish poet, write a story that was never real. "Okay," I said, my voice flat. I tried to inject a note of casualness into it, to pretend that his rejection didn't feel like a physical blow. I unbuckled my seatbelt, my movements stiff and robotic. My carefully constructed world was crumbling. The new foundation I had imagined just moments before was turning out to be sand. I reached for the door handle, desperate to escape the suffocating confines of the car, to get back to the familiar solitude of my apartment where I could properly fall apart. "Leo, wait." His voice stopped me. I turned back, my hand still on the handle. He was finally looking at me, and his face was a mask of conflict and misery. I'm not," he trailed off, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of pure frustration. "I'm sorry. I don't know what I'm doing." "It's fine, Julian." I lied, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "Forget it. It was a weird night." "No," he insisted, his voice gaining a sliver of its usual strength. "Don't say that. Please don't say that." He looked so lost, so utterly adrift, that a part of me, the part that loved him beyond all reason, pushed past my own hurt. I let go of the door handle. "Then talk to me," I said, my voice softer now. "Tell me what's happening in your head right now. Because I'm lost." He stared at me for a long moment, and it felt like he was seeing me for the first time. He was seeing the hurt I was trying so desperately to hide. He let out a long, ragged breath. "I'm scared," he whispered, the admission costing him dearly. "I'm just really scared, Leo. I feel like I just broke the one thing in my life that wasn't broken." And there it was. The fear I had harbored for so long, the very fear that had kept me silent, was his fear too. He wasn't afraid of the kiss. He was afraid of losing the friendship. He was afraid of the same thing I was. It wasn't a rejection of me. It was a terror of the consequences. The understanding dawned on me with a painful, clarifying light. We were both standing on opposite sides of the same chasm of fear. The next few days were a special kind of hell. They were an exercise in strained silence and digital distance. He did go home that night, and the space he left behind in my apartment felt vast and cold. He sent a text the next morning, a masterpiece of avoidant brevity. "Hey, Sorry about last night. I'm a mess. I stared at the message for a full 10 minutes, trying to dissect its meaning. Was it an apology for the kiss? An apology for his panicked retreat? An apology for his very existence? I typed and deleted a dozen replies before settling on a simple, non-committal, "It's okay. Get some rest." A text message is a terrible medium for conveying nuance. Our exchange was a perfect example. It was a conversation between two people shouting across a canyon, the words losing all their meaning as they echoed off the walls of our mutual anxiety. After that, a fragile, tense silence descended. A day passed, then two. My apartment, once his sanctuary, was now just a quiet, empty space that mocked me with memories of his presence. The indent he'd left on the couch cushion seemed to accuse me. His favorite mug sat, clean and unused, in the cupboard. The open bedroom door was now a gaping wound. I closed it. My mind became a torture chamber of self-recrimination. I replayed the kiss over and over, analyzing it from every angle, like a detective reviewing security footage of a crime. Had I leaned in too fast? Had my response been too eager? Had I projected all of my own longing onto him, forcing him into a moment he wasn't ready for? The quiet observer in me had failed. I had stopped watching and I had started wanting, and in doing so, I had shattered the beautiful, fragile thing we had built. The pain of it was a dull, constant ache behind my ribs. It wasn't the sharp sting of rejection, it was the hollow grief of loss. I had lost my best friend. On the third day, I couldn't take it anymore. The silence was more poisonous than any argument could ever be. I had spent a year building walls to protect myself from this exact pain, and it had found me anyway. The only difference was that now, he was trapped on the other side of the rubble with me. I realized that my self-protection had become a form of isolation for both of us. He was scared, and I had let him run away. I had let him believe he was alone in that fear. I picked up my keys, my heart pounding a nervous rhythm against my sternum. I was going to his apartment. I didn't have a plan. I just knew that the conversation we started in his car needed a final, definitive sentence. I couldn't live in the ellipsis any longer. When he opened the door, he looked like a ghost. He was wearing the same sweatshirt he'd had on 3 days earlier. His hair was a mess, and his eyes were shadowed with exhaustion and something that looked like shame. His apartment, which I had only been in a few times, was neat and impersonal, like a hotel room he happened to live in. It lacked any of the lived-in warmth of my own place. It was the space of a man who was never really home. He just stared at me, his expression unreadable. "Hi," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Can I come in?" He hesitated for a fraction of a second, then stepped back, holding the door open. I walked into the sterile living room and stood in the center, not knowing what to do with my hands. He closed the door behind me, the sound unnervingly loud in the quiet apartment. "Julian," I began, turning to face him. "We need to talk. I can't do this. This silence. It's worse than anything." He wouldn't meet my eyes. He stared at a spot on the floor just past my shoulder. "There's nothing to talk about," he mumbled. "I messed up. I'm sorry." A surge of frustration, hot and sharp, cut through my anxiety. "Stop apologizing," I said, my voice rising slightly. "And stop telling me you messed up. What does that even mean? Did you mess up by driving past my street? Did you mess up by asking me if it was okay?" He ran his hands through his hair again, a gesture of profound inner turmoil. "You don't understand," he finally said, his back to me. "Then make me understand," I pleaded, taking a step toward him. "Please, don't shut me out. Not after that. You said you were scared of breaking the one thing that wasn't broken. Was that us? Is that what you meant?" He stopped pacing and leaned his forehead against the wall, his shoulders slumped in defeat. His voice, when he spoke, was so quiet I could barely hear it. "Yes, you were the one breaking it, Julian," I said gently. "With the silence. With the running away. The kiss didn't break it. The kiss was honest." He turned around slowly, and I could see tears shimmering in his eyes, something I had never seen before. "It's not that simple, Leo," he whispered. "For you, maybe it is. You're so steady. You know who you are. I don't. I've spent my whole life being what other people needed me to be. The good son, the successful consultant, Clara's dependable boyfriend. It was all a role, and it was exhausting. And then there was you. With you, I didn't have to be anything. I could just be. And it was the first time I felt quiet inside. He took a shaky breath, his gaze fixed on mine. That night in the car, that wasn't a mistake. It was the most honest thing I've done in my entire adult life. And it terrified me, because it wasn't a role. It was just me. And my feelings for you. They aren't complicated and messy like they were with Clara. They're quiet, and simple, and real. And I have absolutely no idea how to handle something that real. So I panicked. I ran back to what I knew, which is hiding. I was afraid of ruining you, of ruining this, because you're the only thing that's ever felt like home. His confession, raw and painful and beautiful, washed over me. All the fear, all the anxiety, all the hurt I had been carrying for 3 days dissolved in the face of his staggering honesty. He wasn't rejecting me. He was confessing that he felt unworthy of the very thing we both wanted. He wasn't running from me. He was running from himself, from a version of himself he was finally, terrifyingly, allowing himself to be. I closed the distance between us, and this time, there was no hesitation. I cupped his face in my hands, my thumbs gently stroking his cheeks. "You idiot," I whispered, my own voice thick with unshed tears. "You beautiful, beautiful idiot. You could never ruin this. Don't you know? You're the one who built it." That conversation was the second hinge. The first had opened the door, but this one, this painful, honest confrontation, was what allowed us to walk through it together. We stood in his sterile, lonely apartment for a long time, just holding each other, a silent acknowledgement of all the fear and longing that had finally been spoken aloud. We didn't solve everything in that one moment, but we had laid a new foundation, not one of unspoken rules and careful boundaries, but one of brutal, tender honesty. We moved from his apartment back to mine, a silent, mutual decision. My space was our space now. That evening, we didn't put on a movie. We sat on the couch, side by side, and we talked. We talked for hours. He told me about the crushing weight of expectation he'd carried his whole life, the feeling of being an imposter in his own skin. I told him about the locked room inside me, about the day I realized I loved him, and the fear that had kept me silent for so long. We laid our secrets out between us, like old photographs, examining them in the soft light of this new, shared understanding. There was a profound sense of relief in it, the clean, cathartic feeling of lancing a wound. As the night deepened, a comfortable quiet settled over us. The exhaustion was deep, but it was a good kind of tired, the kind that comes after a long journey is finally over. When it was time to sleep, there was a moment of soft, unspoken hesitation. The old patterns, the old rituals, were still there, ghosts in the room. I stood up and started toward my bedroom. I didn't look back to see if he was following. I didn't have to. I felt his presence behind me. I walked into my room, and he followed me inside. I reached back and closed the door, the soft click of the latch echoing in the quiet room. The door was no longer a question left ajar. It was a statement, a choice. We were closing the door on the world and on our old life, together. The days that followed were a process of gentle discovery. We were learning a new language, a new way of being with each other. The old anxieties, the constant internal analysis of every gesture, were gone, replaced by a quiet certainty. The touch that had once been a source of both pleasure and panic was now simply a source of comfort. We would sit and read for hours, his leg pressed against mine. I would work in my darkroom, the red safe light casting a warm glow, and he would just sit in the corner, content to watch the magic of an image appearing on paper. His presence was no longer a disruption to my solitude. It was an enhancement of it. We were redefining domesticity. It wasn't in grand gestures, but in the tiny, mundane moments. It was in the way he started making the coffee in the morning exactly how I liked it, without ever having been told. It was in the way I started keeping his favorite kind of beer in the fridge. It was in waking up in the middle of the night and reaching out, just to feel the solid, warm presence of him next to me, a silent reassurance that he was real, that this was real. We were two solitary planets who had finally found a stable, shared orbit, creating our own small, gentle gravity. The kinetic, restless energy that had always defined him began to soften. The profound loneliness that had been my constant companion for so long began to recede, like a tide going out. There are moments in your life that arrive disguised as something ordinary, and you only recognize their significance in retrospect. You look back and see the path that led you there, the series of small, almost invisible choices that culminated in a single, life-altering event. But sometimes, if you are very, very lucky, you get to recognize the moment as it's happening. You get to feel the hinge swing. For me, it wasn't just the car ride, or the kiss, or the confession. It was all of it. It was the entire, painful, beautiful process of dismantling the safe, lonely structures we had built for ourselves and learning to construct a new one, a shared home, built on a foundation of quiet truth. We didn't need loud declarations or public pronouncements. Our love story was written in the language we had always spoken best, the language of a shared silence, of a closed door, of the profound and simple peace of knowing you are not ready to say goodnight and finding you never have to again.